All right, just want to welcome everyone. This class of Noahide laws. Again, want to welcome everyone. Class of the Noahide laws, holding by laws of idolatry. We spoke last week just in general, about idolatry, what it is. It's more of an overview, I think, than anything else. And now we're going to get down to the nitty gritty, about exactly what it is. All right, so there are two ideas. There are two ideas over here. One is that there's idolatry of thought. Remember that a person is not necessarily punished for their thoughts, because we say, Devarim shebalev eno Devarim, right? Words of my heart. Don't really mean a whole lot. But when it comes to things, let's say like idolatry, then that's different, right? Even if I don't say it outright, I could be, I can trace idolatry by thinking it. So here we're saying idolatry is thoughts, belief, words. I mean, words are obvious, right? If a person would say, this is my God, you're over. You transgress over here. Not only that, acts of idolatry, right? Acts of idolatry. So even though all forms of idolatry are forbidden, there is only one that you're liable for in this world, and that is the act itself. Now we're going to see, right? Again, if a person bowed down, worshipped, with, let's say, libation, or what do we say? Let's say you killed an animal towards it, different things that are acts. Here we're going to see what it means. Idolatry of thoughts. So Genesis chapter 2 verse 16. Right, we're going to start with that. Tells me the Lord God commanded unto Adam. Now it says over there that God commanded Adam. Let's just see the whole verse over here. Chapter 2 verse 16, right? The Torah says, oops, 1 second. The Torah 2:16, 1 second. Messed it up here. And Hashem God commanded Adam, saying, right, of every tree of the garden you can freely eat, tree of knowledge, good and evil, you shall eat thereof, or on the day you eat of it you shall die. Right? So here it says, Hashem God commanded Adam, right? Commanded the man, or commanded Adam over here. So the verse goes out of the way to say, the Lord Hashem is God. Meaning, what would I take out from it? He alone is God. So Talmud Sanhedrin 56b says that the occasion of this verse is Hashem, and only Hashem is God. Clear? Now, there are two things over here. There's a negative command. There's a positive command. What's the negative command? You don't exchange God. What's the prohibition? Prohibition is that you don't exchange any other God for God, i.e. that's idolatry. Now, what's idolatry? It's a replacement or exchange of God. Now, this is not, this is a much bigger idea than the idea of worshiping a graven image. That I understand. Person bows down, gives it more power than it is, right? We understand it has no power. But you give it the power it doesn't have. That's what idolatry is. Right? Idolatry doesn't necessarily mean bowing down to something. It gives something power, money, fame, these other things, etc. But it includes worship of any natural object or abstract force. Is it money an abstract force? Maybe it's more a positive force. But the worship of any image representing God, right? That's going to be the problem. God has no form, right? He's got zero form. So you can't have anything that depicts him. Remember, in school they'd say, draw a picture of God. They'd never do that today. Right? 100% they would never do that today. You can't force your beliefs on me. Right? Image of God, what would people draw? What would people draw? An old man with a long beard sitting on a throne. Right? But he's got no image. So if you worship such an image, what are you worshiping? You're not worshiping God. You're not worshiping Hashem. Right? You're not worshiping Him. So if you worship any item, then you're going to say is the embodiment of God or part of God. Right? Anthropomorphism. Give God physical character traits. Also a problem. God is not corporeal. There's no physical manifestation in this world. So that's a negative command. What's the positive command? You have to fear, you have to have awe, you have to respect God. So the creator and master of all things gives life. He's the true ultimate power. And he deserves our fear, awe, respect. We have to love him. You need, obviously, the base is fear. But fear doesn't necessarily lead to love. You need love of God for sure. But love of God will lead to fear of God. Fear of God does not necessarily lead to love of God. But you need fear. 100%. But you need to accept God's authority. Right? And law requires respect and awe of him. Right? So that is the positive command. Now, what's the difference in the approach for Noahide versus Jewish prohibition? For Jews, many times idolatry, right? We have no problem obligating people to do things. Idolatry, a big one. Very big one. It incurs death penalty. But there are other types of idolatry a Jew would not receive death for, but it's still forbidden. For example, a Jew's not liable to death penalty if they kiss an idol or they embrace it. It's forbidden. 100% it's forbidden, but it's not death penalty. Now the question is, a Noahide is executed for all types of idolatry, or maybe only liable for those which Jews are liable for the death penalty. So the Talmud tells us, Sanhedrin 56b, anything idolatrous for which a Jewish court will execute Jews. In other words, anything the Jew would do, in idolatry, that would get them killed, Noahides are warned against. Anything idolatrous for which a Jewish court would not execute Jews, Noahides are not warned against. Right? In other words, if the Jewish court is going to execute a Jew for idolatry, so it should be the same thing for non-Jews. If they're not, even though it's forbidden, so non-Jews wouldn't be warned over here. So what does it tell me? Any Jewish act of idolatry that incurs capital punishment for Jews also incurs capital punishment for Noahides, right? That's what he did. Right? That's what it is. Right? That's what it is over here. So they're going to be liable for death penalty. Therefore, capital forms of idolatry, the same for Jews and non-Jews. Right? That would be clear. That would be clear. Now, what about idolatry forbidden for Jews, but they don't die? They don't get the death penalty for it. Do we say Noahides are still liable for a lesser form of idolatry or not? Or maybe it's not even forbidden. Right? Is a Noahide prohibited from embracing or kissing an idol? Right? That would be the question. Now, if the Brisa, this source does, they're not executed, still prohibited. Right? That again, is going to be part of the question. So, how does it come out, practically speaking, that Noahides, their liability is exactly the same as Jews? Right? Normally, we say that it's not necessarily the same. In this case, it is. It comes on the Rambam. The Rambam says, the Laws of Kings, chapter 9, halacha 2. A Gentile sentenced to death for any type of idolatrous worship, for which the Jewish courts would impose capital punishment. In other words, a non-Jew is going to be liable for something the Jewish court would punish a Jew by death. But a Gentile is not executed for a type of idolatrous worship which a Jewish court would not impose capital punishment. Because even though a Noahide is going to be executed for those forms of worship, it's still forbidden to do it, but doesn't mean it's going to get executed over here. Right? So therefore, if a Jewish court is not going to impose that he should die, then he's not going to die. Right? If the Jewish court is going to impose the Jew's going to die, then they'll die also. So the question is whether they incur capital liability, i.e. death penalty, or not. But it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same for Jews and for Noahides over here. And not only that, but it doesn't change. Definitions never change. Right? Idolatry is what it is. I know people hate that statement, but it is what it is. It doesn't change. Doesn't matter who commits it. Right? The only question we said before, we mentioned last week, is about Shitu. Believe in Hashem plus another entity. So for Jews, that's idolatry. For Noahides, not. Right? That's how it comes out. Now about the prohibition of turning to idolatry, what does that mean? It says in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 4, not turn towards the idols. Right? And it says in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 30, beware lest you seek to find out how these nations serve their gods. What's the Torah telling me? What's it telling me over here? That you're not allowed to contemplate, study, investigate the thoughts or theologies of idolaters' religion. In other words, I can't read the New Testament. Right? I can't read about Hinduism. I can't read about, other idolaters' things. So therefore, a person should not entertain idolaters' thoughts, contemplations, other such things. Not only that, you're prohibited from planning or contemplating prayer or worshiping an idol. Now, what's the novelty over here? That a person will get punished even if they didn't do it. Right? Because idolatry is so... You were planning to do it. A person plans to worship idols. Very good. I mean, so good. But he plans to worship idols. Or she plans to worship idols, but he didn't do it. So if you didn't do it, you're not normally punished for something you didn't do. You can be punished for your thoughts, no question. But usually we're not. And, in most things. Except when it comes to idolatry and it comes to immorality. So a person had a plan. They're contemplating it. They didn't even verbalize it. That's what it sounds like. They didn't even verbalize it. So if you don't verbalize it, why do you transgress? Words in your heart are only words. They're really nothing. What happens? Still punished. Right? You're not getting a death penalty, but you're punished. What about books of idolaters? Can I read that so I can brush up on it and, be a counter missionary? Right? They're forbidden. Shouldn't be studied or even owned. Right? It said, Torah said you can't bring an abomination into your house. Talking about that. It's really talking about idols. But also these books, etc., they should be destroyed. Right? So their falsehoods will not persist in the world. Get rid of them. Right? That's what we should do. As the Shulchan Aruch says. Now, the New Testament, what do we hold? Right? Whether Shituf is or not, we hold, it doesn't matter. There's a difference of opinion, major difference of opinion. Probably need at least 3, 4, 5 classes through, all the text. We're not going to do that. You'll take my word. There's a huge difference of opinion. But at the end of the day, we hold Christianity as idolatry. That's the bottom line. Even though central figure was a Jew, of course, we're our own worst enemy. In the Messianic movement, right? Probably aware, most of the people in charge of the Messianic movement are Jews. It's like if you want to do something, if we want to be the best we can be, we go all the way to the top. We want to burst to go all the way to the bottom. Nothing in between. Right? There's nothing in between over here. So even though the central figure over here was a Jew, the theology, even the apparent wise sayings, carefully crafted distortions. Plenty of distortions, misrepresentation of Torah thought. Right? The last few weeks gone through some contradictions. Contradictions in the New Testament on Tanakh talk. Listen, I have to be half drunk, stoned, and who knows what, come up with such crazy, explanations. But, okay. It's total distortion, total misrepresentation. It's what we call over here a bastardization of Torah thought and belief. That's what it is. total misrepresentation. So therefore, this book, it's no difference between this book and any other, idolatrous book, pagan book, whatever you want to call it. But there is a difference, right? There is a difference because there are, we're going to, quote unquote, superficial similarities, somewhat parallels to parts of rabbinic literature. Right? Because when you look at some of the things that are said in the New Testament, where did they get it from? Got it from us. Now, they demolished it, turned it into a pretzel and misrepresented it, okay, right? But a lot of things, they get it from us. So, really, you should never have these books. You get rid of them. Make sure no one can use them, right? So, a person, now, what about learning from these texts? What about learning from these texts? Is the person allowed to learn from them? So a person should only learn from them if their purpose is to understand how to recognize and better avoid that which is prohibited, or save other people from the trap, right? From that trap of this material. So I would say like this: someone grew up as a Christian. They grew up as a Christian, and they're going to use the New Testament to answer other people. They should do it. They'd be allowed to do it. Now, the question would be, and I've thought about this a number of times, even though I never did anything about it, right? And that is that, should I get a New Testament, go through it, mark it up, and go into counter-missionary stuff also, right? My focus really deal with Noahides, dealing with, people convert, plenty of good, good organizations out there. Rabbi Singer, Rabbi Skovak, Jews for Judaism, etc. So I never bothered to do it, right? It's something I'm kind of interested in, but, I never bothered to do it. So if someone owns it, they already own it, and they're going to use it for that purpose, good. Then they should. If they don't want to, they say, I want to get, I totally don't want my house, good. You also, get rid of it. But if you're going to use it for a good purpose, you can. Now, what does it also mean, turning to idolatry? That is, you can't learn from a min. Who's a min? Is a person whose beliefs, conceptions of God are fundamentally wrong. Right? There are 5 types of minim. Now, just an interesting thing, a min, the Talmud says many times, if a min does this or a min does that. Right? It really means just a heretic. That's what it means. Right? Or someone whose beliefs, conceptions of God are fundamentally wrong. Okay. But there's a notricon. What's a notricon? And an acronym. The words, the letters min, mean may Yeshu anoitzri. What is may Yeshu anoitzri? May JC the Christian. Now, why did they use the word min? Censors. Right? They couldn't say JC. They only mentioned him a few times in the Talmud, and each time they mentioned his name is not good. Right? So they don't want to have any problems from the censors. So what do? So when they wanted to mention, now, how do I know this? Because they have uncensored Gemaras, right? And many times when it says a min over here, it means reference to JC. But they don't want to say, again, they don't want to say it outright. Today, there's less of an issue, from the censor. So they printed it, but they censored it. They censored it years ago, many years ago. Right? They censored it. So there are 5 types of meaning. There's one, doesn't believe in any God, right? An atheist, basically, or any guiding force for the universe. That's first thing. Second thing is a polytheist, believes in more than one God. Third thing is one who believes in one God, believes he has now or has ever had a form, body, or other physical manifestation. Sound familiar? Right? Sounds like Christianity, right? Make himself turn him into a person, or who knows what. Fourth thing is you deny creation's fixed beginning ex nihilo, i.e., anyone know Latin over here? Something from nothing. Created something from nothing. Right? From God's command. Right? They don't believe in creation, essentially. Fifth thing is one who believes, serves, or worships any natural man-made item as an intermediary between man and God. Can't have intermediaries. Right? We don't have intermediaries. So these are all classified as idolatrous, permitted. Now, there's another group. This is what the Rambam brings down, the laws of repentance. Also, I remember learning these. We'll go through them. I remember learning these when I was still in university, middle of university, and I was studying by the conservative movement. And I'm going to list a number of these things. And I realized that the teachers were teaching me are all heretics, right? There's another group of minim over here that are deviant believers, but are called scorners or mockers or deniers of Torah. You can't learn from them. So in the month of Elul, we're learning the laws of repentance by the Rambam. This came up. So what's the first one? One who doesn't believe in prophecy that God communicates with man. One of the 13 principles of the Rambam. Right? Second thing is one who denies God's omniscience. They knows the thoughts of man. Third, one who believes that the mitzvahs are man-made or any way devised by man. Fourth, one who believes that oral law is man-made in any way a human invention. Fifth is one who believes that God replaced or altered any part of the Torah or any mitzvah of the revelation of Mount Sinai. So basically, all my professors at this point, they hit all of them. They hit all of these. God communicates with man? Nah, come on. Doesn't do that. God knows the thoughts of man? Knock that out. Oral law, it's all man-made. They don't believe God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. They believe something happened. They're not exactly sure. Or maybe God actually spoke to him. Nope, they're not, but they're not sure exactly what happened. So they say it's all man-made. And things were altered. Things were changed. And so as we're going through this list, I'm sitting there like shaking my head. And I'm like, I'm in trouble here. Because all my professors are all heretics. Right? Every last one of them are heretics. So this is before email. And I basically decided I can't go back there. They're all heretics. So I wrote a letter to Columbia University asking if I could study by them. They said yes. I could lead the program. Yes. Very good. Wrote a letter to the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And I said sayonara, basically. I said, thank you very much. I'm out of here. Not coming back. So this is what they represent, in different ways. They deny God knows the thoughts of man, right? They deny the fact that, or they say that the mitzvahs are man-made. Oral law is man-made, right? They're out. Heretics, right? Deniers of Torah. Now, this group is not necessarily idolaters. Foolish, but not idolaters. So basically, if you believe in any of these, God forbids, then you deny the Torah. That's what it is. You're totally denying Torah over here. So therefore, you cannot be a believing Jew or Noahide if you don't believe any of these. Right? Just like the 13 principles. Rambam's 13 principles. If you don't believe in them as a Jew, you're out. Resurrection of the dead, prophecy, coming to the Messiah. God is unique. God is absolute. He has the ability to reward and punish. Right? If you don't believe in them, unless you repent, you're out. You lose your status being a Jew over here. So, a person should not learn from any of these deviant or erring believers. They could be brilliant. They could be a lot of things, but they're heretics. Essentially, they're heretics. They deny God has power over here. They deny the basic tenets of Judaism over here. So therefore, the prohibition of turning to idolatry also includes debating idolaters and atheists. Now, having discussion with them to expose them to Torah might be okay, right? Might be permitted over here. But in general, having any connections to them should be forbidden. So, great rabbis of the last generation, Rav Shabir Soloveitchik, a blessed memory of Moshe Feinstein, a blessed memory of Yaakov Kamenetsky, a blessed memory, these were Torah giants. The last generation said unequivocally, nothing to talk about. We're not allowed, Orthodox Jews, Orthodox rabbis should have nothing to do with Reform or conservative rabbis. Even to debate them. To show them the fallacy of their ways. They say, why not? You're going to expose them. Right? You'll give them exposure, to Torah. So, we don't have anything to them. Zero. they just turn things, they twist things, they don't, they're saying you can't recognize them. That's the point, right? In Philadelphia, they have board of rabbis, right? They're mostly Reform and conservative. How can an Orthodox be a rabbi, be part of it? No. Forbidden, right? This is outright forbidden. It wasn't like, some say like this, some say like that. No, it's across the board. Across the board, you have nothing to do with them, right? Maybe give him a car of them, you can draw them closer. We're not interested. We don't want to give them any credibility. We don't want to give them a soap up. We can make fun of them. I mean, they are heretics. So, there is a mitzvah to make fun of them. I spoke today earlier and I mentioned, about this conservative rabbi being paid $1 million a year. Beverly Hills, of all places. I think he's still there. 5 years ago, comes and says on the 7th day of Passover at night, he says on the 7th day of Passover, the Exodus never happened. Exodus from Egypt never happened. Right? It's paid $1 million a year. So if I was sitting there, I was like, why do we eat matzah? I would have asked them, why do you eat matzah? Because, it's a myth. It's an idea. What do you mean? It gives me stomach problems. I don't want to eat 35 pounds in 35 seconds. Why? Well, it never happened. Right? So if the whole thing never happened, why do you have a Passover Seder? Oh, it's a custom. It's this. What do you mean? It didn't happen. If I didn't believe these things happen, I wouldn't be talking to you. Why would I be wasting my time here? Right? It never happened. So why are you going to eat matzah? You're going to eat bitter herbs or herbs, depending where you're from. You're gonna inhale this stuff and it's gonna like clean out your sinuses for like 3 days. You gotta be out of your mind. The Torah says you don't have to find any living product, in your house. You don't have to find it, you don't have to see it. Right? So, that's just a suggestion. So why do they sell matzah? It's commemorative. Commemorative of what? Doesn't the Torah say it's commemorative of the Exodus from Egypt? Oh, but it never happened. Not only that, Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 says, Anochi Hashem Elokecho. I am the Lord your God. God intervenes in history. How do I know? This is the mitzvah to understand that God runs the world. How do I know God intervenes in history? Because the Torah tells me. It took me out of Egypt. Took me out of the house of bondage. Oh, but it never happened. Right? So the commentary is asked, so why doesn't it say, I'm the Lord your God because he took me out of, created the world. That'll be a better proof. Create the world. One problem. What's the one problem? Who was there when he created the world? Nobody. Who was there when he took the Jews out of Egypt? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children, i.e. about 3 million people. 3 million witnesses. Pass it down generation to generation as part of the Passover Haggadah. Right? Fathers got an obligation to tell their son. You got 4 generations in their Passover Seder. So you got 80 of those generations, get back to the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai. But if it all never happened, why would I go through the Haggadah? Why would I eat matzah? Why would I do any of it? That would be my question. But I'm not getting paid. I ain't getting paid $1 million a year to say that. But that, you put up a mezuzah. The parchment goes up in the mezuzah. It's all about the Exodus from Egypt. The entire evening service that we say is all about the Exodus from Egypt. Right? So, the parchment goes in tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them. You know what it talks about? Exodus from Egypt. It's a good thing it never happened. So why would I do that? Why would I do any of that? Right? So, somebody like that, you want to learn Torah from? For sure not. But you got Orthodox rabbis, it's a whole nother discussion. But you got Orthodox rabbis you should never listen to either. That say all kinds of crazy things. Let me just give one example while I'm on this rant. I got somebody, very touchy-feely and this and that. He's got a big following. And he talks about homosexuality. What does he say? I know the other Orthodox is going to be upset with me, but what are you going to do? This person was playing with dolls when he was 3 years old. Right? This boy. So what do you think? Of course he's going to grow up and be that way. You think God's going to kill him? Or what does Leviticus chapter 18 say? It's an abomination. Death penalty. If the kid's wired that way, I'm wired a lot of ways. Right? Ray can testify over here. Right? A doctor once told me they isolated the gene. I've isolated a lot of genes. Got an anger gene. I don't like to get up early gene. Miser gene. I don't like to give charity gene. I mean, plenty of things. We can isolate the gene. Guess what? They're bad character traits. And this is not a normal thing anyway. Because the Torah says it's clear. Man's got to cling to a woman, not to another man. Right? They say, I know the ultra-Orthodox are going to be upset at me. Yeah, because you're a heretic for saying that. You can't say that. It's tragic. These people can be rehabilitated. There are people that can work with them. Right? But it's an unreal desire. It's a weird desire. Totally weird desire. Right? So that being the case, when I tell people to listen to such a person, never. You plaster that person. Why? He's a heretic. He's an absolute heretic. Yeah, I know. The ultra-Orthodox are going to be upset with me. Of course they're going to be upset with you. Because the Torah says one thing and you say it's not true. You think God's going to really do that? Person got free choice? Yeah, person could have messed up hormones. True. Could have messed up hormones. And if someone has an anger issue, that messed up hormones, you got to say maybe he did it to himself. Maybe. We're wired a certain way. Person's wired a certain way. God doesn't want you to act on it, but you have what to work on. Some have it more, some have it less, and this and that and the other thing, and a lot of things we do ourselves. Right? But to say God's going to look the other way. Why is he going to look the other way? Why in the world is going to look the other way? Someone who says such a thing, you run as far away as you can. You run like the plague. There are people out there saying it's no problem. It's no problem with homosexuality. I can't answer that. Listen, the chief rabbi of England just got knighted. Or is getting knighted, whatever the case is. Everyone's like, wow, what a big honor. This person's also a heretic. Total heretic. He comes out and says, yeah, we can teach homosexuality in the schools. What are you, out of your mind? I understand why he said it. It's a political position. Nobody holds to this guy, in England anyway. The ultra-Orthodox. But what's the problem? My Rebbe shredded him like no tomorrow a number of years ago. Why? Because he's a chief rabbi. If he's the chief rabbi, he says, see, Orthodox Jews say it's okay to teach this. But you see, when they were putting pressure on, religious schools to teach this curriculum, they didn't go in the Muslim schools to do that. You know why? Because the Muslims would have burnt down the whole place. They would have burnt down all of England, like France did a number of years ago. It took them 3 weeks to calm it down. They weren't going to test that. So it's a whole thing, right? But, somebody like that, he's being knighted. He's being knighted by the queen. Okay. So he's being knighted, by the king. I can't even say the queen. Oh, Shalom, blessed memory, right? The king, being knighted by the king. Give me a break. How can an Orthodox Jew and you're the chief rabbi say that that's okay? What's the answer? You can't. So you lose funding, right? You shut down the school if you have to. Right? There are much lesser things that many years ago schools got shut down. Why? Because they want to give in. They want to teach English. They want to teach other things. Right? They want to be left alone. If they weren't going to be left alone, they're going to get harassed. They shut it down. Went to other places. Right? But for an Orthodox Jew, the chief rabbi, to say it's okay. Again, it's a political position. I understand why you did it. Doesn't mean it's right by any stretch. You gotta have a backbone. You got to stand up and say, no, it's forbidden. Leviticus chapter 18. We're not allowed to. Yeah, but you got to be politically correct. Well, it's a good thing I'm not the chief rabbi, isn't it? Right? But come on, you got to have a backbone. It's black and white. Yeah, we're told from such a person. That's what we're talking about. People who have these, they can be Orthodox. Doesn't matter. Have your mind open till the brains fall on the floor. Right? You can be Orthodox, but they're totally, as we say in Yiddish, they're totally krum. They're totally out of their minds. But these are the people, such an upside down world. They get the greatest respect in the world. They get, greatest respect in the world. I'm going to be in Florida. I should go to Boca where this idiot, has a what do you call it? He has a missionary come speak as a motivational speaker in the synagogue. So 2 years ago, people put a lot of pressure that the person didn't come. Right? Person didn't come and they want to make disagreements, whatever. The rabbi was still adamant and was upset that, he backed down. Second time around, he got someone else and they did it. Like somebody like that. Sought after speaker, very polished, very this, head of a rabbinical court there, in Boca. Would you want to convert through them? I don't think so. You watch my 8-minute rant, my YouTube channel called it was Bogus in Boca or something. Whatever it was. Yeah. Maybe I'll go down there, I'll call him. Give him a piece of my mind. A joke. Going to learn Torah from such a person? So these things you got to be careful of, right? 100%. Anyone who's going to be in any of these ways a denier of Torah, some innovative thing, you run away like the plague. Verbal idolatry. Right, we'll finish this up. The Torah says, you shall not mention the name of other gods. Right, Exodus chapter 23, verse 13. So the Rambam, the Gemara says, tell you that it means that you're not allowed to praise, give any credence in the name of idolatry. Right? That you can't do. But that you're not allowed to do. Therefore, there are a number of restrictions over here in the name of idols. You can't pledge or swear an oath in the name of an idol or get others to do so. Right? You can't cause others to do so. You're not allowed to swear. It doesn't necessarily mean sincerely, but you're not allowed to have any sincere belief in the idol. Right? Nothing. This idol is nothing. If it's in front of me, I'd kick it like a football. Make a field goal. Whatever it is. To make fun of it. It's got no power. You cannot have any sincere belief in it. Not only that, you cannot refer to an idol in a respectful manner. That's why we make fun of idols all the time. Right? Buddha, we call him the short little fat guy. Right? That's what I would call him. Right? The short little fat guy. You're allowed to make fun of him. It's a mitzvah to make fun of him. You're obligated to make fun of them. Right? There's no such thing as, I have to show respect. Why do I show respect? Right? For example, many of the Catholic saints are actual idols. Right? So when you're referring to them, if a person is going to mention them, you don't say, oh, saints, so and so, or whatever it is. Right? That you're not allowed to do. If you had a casual reference or a neutral reference, right, that might be okay, but certainly you should not use the name of an idol, even a casual sense. It should never be done. The mitzvah to defame it, to make fun of it, etc. A person can mention the name of an idol. Let's say you're talking about idolatry. So, you want to mention the name of an idol. Okay. Right? That's not a problem. You can mention it. In any of these cases, even if you did any of these things, it's not liable for death penalty. Right? It's not death penalty over here. But if a person said verbally they accept upon themselves as his God, they say, this is my God, then that's a capital crime. Right? The question is, what happens if you think it? If you think it, may be forbidden, not necessarily a capital crime. Right? May not be a capital crime over here. But, thinking it's bad, there's no question. But at the same time, if you accept it in any way, shape, or form, that's a problem. Right? That's a major problem. It's going to be death penalty. Yeah. So any questions, on that? Verbal idolatry, different types of deniers of Torah, scoffers, scorners, books of idolatry, learning from these people, idolaters' thoughts and theologies, and the difference between Noahide and Jewish prohibition of idolatry. Any questions on any of that? Someone asked, you type pretty fast. How do we know Noahides cope and survive in places that seem lawless? Yeah, the question is, how do you live in secular society in general? Right? There's the problem today. The problem today is that you don't have any rights to say anything. Right? People can say whatever they want about you, but you can't come out and say, well, I don't believe in homosexuality because the Bible doesn't believe in it. You can't say that. People tell me say such a thing, you're toast. Right? You get fired. Right? Jews have the same issue. Right? And that is, we also have to live in secular society. So we have more, we have more obligations, things I think are more severe, by a Jew, but even by Noahides, even if things are not necessarily forbidden, I would say there are a lot of things you got to be careful of the moral imperative. Right? That was the moral imperative. Things are a lot worse. I understand. I understand things have, dramatically changed, since I was school. When I was in school, that there were issues. Nothing like the gender issues today. Certainly not. Certainly when I was growing up, if you were gay, that was, that wasn't something to be proud of. Wasn't something you're going to prance around, so to speak, and brag about. Yeah, there were people who had earrings, there were people who did drugs, people were promiscuous, other things. But what we see today is just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. So we have to know how to navigate secular society, right? That's not going to be the scope of this class. I mean, I could probably speak about it for days, right? But a person has to, you can't just slam somebody. That's a problem, right? But there are things you have to stand up for, and you have to stick up for, and it's extremely difficult, especially if someone has kids and you put them in public school. I know a lot of people, what they do is they homeschool, right? They homeschool, but we don't have Noahide communities. That's eventually one day on the agenda, in different ways. But it's very, very hard, to navigate, these negative values, because the only way to keep out the negative values are to keep strong in Torah values. And again, when I was first married, or I was engaged, I had a doctor of a community, and whatever community told me, said, I'm offended the way you dress. And I'm like, what's the problem with the way I dress? The only difference is I wear a suit and a jacket. I wear a hat. I wear white and black or white and blue, whatever. I wear tzitzis and I have a yarmulke. I said, let me ask you a question. This is whatever, doctor in the community. I said, if I shaved my head, if I got a mohawk, had tattoos or piercings all over my body, and I sat in your roof on a daily basis, and I was playing a guitar and smoking pot, would that bother you? I actually said this, right? I actually said this. And person looked at me, thinking about it, I'm like, I want to give good values to my kids, and this doesn't bother you? I'm like a pothead, shaved head, body piercings? No. This is 30 years ago. I'm not talking something happened last week, right? This would be tame compared to what's going on, right? So the more a person is steeped in Torah and mitzvahs, that's how they're going to survive. It's the only way. Yeah, and you're going to say, wow, no, I don't have that much to do. There's plenty to do. There's plenty to learn. I keep you busy for the next 250 years if I would live that long. Plenty what to learn, right? That is no question. The bigger question is, how do you give that over to, to your kids, especially if they're in public school and they see all this stuff? That's hard, right? That is definitely hard. That I would say, and I know one of my students, they're, to conversion, they're homeschooling their kids. They don't want their kids in school, right? Who knows what they'll come back with, right? And so when I was growing up, people would say, yeah, I sent my kid to college, he came back. If they came back normal, that would be a miracle. Today, send a kid to university, what they come back with, who knows what they come back with. And they're having tremendous difficulty today with all kinds of anti-Semitism on campuses. Tremendous problems with that. These people can know nothing to be pro-Israel and get, demolished, by pro-Palestinians and whatever, get bullied and who knows what. So yeah, there's ways to navigate. But the only real way to navigate is just to be strong in Torah mitzvahs and give that as much as you can to your family. That's the only way. That's the only way to stay, to stay strong. There is no other way. You got to nip it in the bud. That's what has to happen. But you gotta, the problem is, if we're out there, we see this, we hear this, it just affects us. It affects us in a negative way, right? But person in the in the workforce, right, wherever they are, they're gonna see this all the time. I mean, when I lived in New Jersey, I had to go to I really didn't have to, but I went to traffic court for something. Anyway, I'm waiting there. There's a girl there, has to be a teenager. Maybe a teenager, right? I can't even tell you how many piercings had on her face, right? At least 3 on each eyebrow, tongue ring, nose ring. I mean, it was like, it's like it's awful to look at. Just, awful. But you're exposed. It's very, very hard, almost impossible not to be exposed, to be insular. It's very hard, right? That's why Jews, Orthodox Jews live in their own communities. That's exactly why. They don't want to be exposed to this stuff. So what do people do? They live in New York City. They live in Brooklyn and Borough Park, and in Borough Park and Flatbush. They're exposed to all kinds of things. All kinds of things from the elements around. I remember before I came to Israel, I was at a wedding. One time I went to Brooklyn. I think I was in New Jersey. I think twice or 3 times altogether. I was there 3 years. I was in Brooklyn. People couldn't even imagine. This is only the second time you've been there, the third time. I said, yeah, I have nothing there. Yeah, no reason to be there. But in general, I came out of this wedding, let's say 10 o'clock at night. It was in the summer. You see people hanging out and this and that. I'm like, I can't believe people live here. I can't believe people raise families here. But people are well overexposed, right? So that's hard. And I see by kids coming to Israel, if they learned in good places, they're affected. They're 100% affected, right? Especially if they have iPhones and other things. Everyone's got texted, everyone's got phones, right? They all have it, so they're exposed to sports, exposed to other things. It's hard. It's hard because once you've been exposed, you don't go back to being insular. It just, once it's done, the damage is done. Doesn't mean you can't work hard trying to fix it, but once certain things become part of your psyche, it's almost impossible. Almost. It becomes very, very hard because you're exposed. That's why we live in our own communities. Noahide is worse. They don't have communities, right? Ray, that's still on the agenda, right? It's part of the agenda. I think it should be done. Yeah, it's gonna be hard. I don't think it's gonna be easy by any stretch, right? But it needs to be done. I think it needs to be done. At least they live near Jewish communities. So Ray asked over, how does the chief rabbi get away with these statements? Because no one takes them seriously. Nobody in the ultra-Orthodox community takes them seriously. They've had a lot of problems with the chief rabbis, in England. Jonathan Sachs, they had problems, things he said. Also the best chief rabbi they had was Lord Jacobowitz, a blessed memory. He was like the strongest one they had. People love Jonathan Sachs and stuff he says and this and that. He's also said a lot of problematic things. Anyone from England knows, right? But again, it's a political position. If it's a political position, okay. They say they'll interview, Palestinians in the Palestinian territories, this and that. They'll say one thing, these politicians, they'll say one thing in English, make themselves look very passive, and in Arabic they're saying something totally different. Right? Same thing. He's saying one thing, he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe homosexuality is okay. So why is he saying it? It's got to be politically correct. Right? He's saying, no, we can teach it. They don't teach it in a different way, whatever. We can do that. How can he do that? Right? Doesn't matter if he's trying to be politically correct. Right? Why did my Rebbe shred him? He shredded him because he represents Orthodox Jewry. Doesn't matter if the Orthodox Jews don't hold of him. It's irrelevant. He is, quote unquote, the chief rabbi. If he's the chief rabbi, finished. You can't. You represent Orthodox Judaism. So what's the first thing a secular person is going to say? See, Orthodox Jews hold homosexuality is okay. That's what they're going to say, right? So what would the English say? That's rubbish. It's total rubbish, right? It's nonsense. Nonsense. Yeah, this, unfortunately, there's a lot of craziness, that goes on, and people use, people have been using the same excuses for years, about certain segments of society. It's not their fault, and parents are on welfare, and they're drug addicts, and they're there. Okay, how long are you going to use that as an excuse? Right? I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. I'm sure you're going to be shocked. If there was not, if Noah did not curse his son Ham, curse forever, right? How would we explain the situation of the blacks today? You look at Africa in general. What has Africa done for the world? Every nation has had their day. England had their day, time of exploration. Portugal had their day, right? Germany's had their day. Other countries have had their day. I don't know what Australia's necessarily done for the world, right? But there were countries that have done things in the world. Africa been a disaster. Disaster. Famines, the Hutus against the Tutsis, million people killed, nobody cared. So you got militias, you got upheaval, famine, all these things. All these things going on. So you say it's colonialism. England took over there for a long time. France was there. When they finally left, it was chaos. Okay. Now I would ask, very simply, how long would it take continents, to come back and be, and thrive? 100 years? 50 years? How long does it take to rebuild? You look at America in general, America's got, a whole melting pot. You got Koreans, you got blacks, you got Puerto Ricans, you got, all these different ethnic groups. Out of all these ethnic groups, there's only one that really hasn't made it. I mean, individuals might have made it in different ways, but there's only one ethnic group that hasn't made it. The blacks. Now, if I didn't hear such a thing, that there's this curse of Ham, then you have to ask yourself, okay, why did it happen? So you say they're on welfare, it's just a bad situation, it keeps perpetuating, it never ends. Why doesn't it end? How long are we going to use that as an excuse? Affirmative action, other things. For how long? 50 years? 100 years? 150 years? I understand there was slavery, all kinds, okay. But there's a certain amount of time things should change. That's what I would think. Why hasn't it changed? Why hasn't that situation changed? Why hasn't Africa changed? So someone told me they got raw materials, they got this, okay, right? What has Zimbabwe done for the world? Congo, any of these places, they've been, successful and all. No, it's been a disaster, absolute disaster. Every one of them. South Africa also flushing themselves down the toilet, right, as well. Right, a lot of problems there now also. So you got all these places. I heard Victor Miller say this, right, and one of the Torah giants of the last generation, and he said that's the reason. That's the reason. Had they stayed in Africa, chained up and all that, okay, they're honest. They can't do anything. But why don't you let them go? And now they're giving problems to Jews and this and that. Now they're liable. So it's a terrible thing to, to free them. But if you look at the continent itself, again, I got hammered for saying this, but, I'm just quoting someone much greater than me. It doesn't make sense otherwise. How long can a society perpetuate itself and keep doing the same thing for, 100 years? 75 years? I would think after a certain amount of time, there'll be a certain level of success. Eventually, things will turn. It happens. Countries go through depressions, other things. Eventually they bounce back, some of them. Some of them takes longer. Right? What's going on in Greece. It's all been a disaster, for a while. But, eventually, hopefully something, will come back or whatever. By then, it doesn't happen. And so they'll say sociologically, they'll say other reasons, but it doesn't add up. Certainly not in America, it doesn't add up. Because with all the things and everything else, why do other ethnic groups, why do they survive? Why do they succeed? As a group, not individuals. As a group. Hard work ethics and other things. Right? Why this group in general? I have nothing against blacks. Not at all. Right? But why? There's only one reason. It wouldn't be for the curse. I have no, what else are we going to say? So it makes sense logically. Especially when you see other people around them in other countries. There's also colonization in other places. So the colonization ended. Okay, it took time. 100%. Then they learn what to do. And then, okay, I can understand it can take time. It's a long time. Colonization ended a long time ago. You're going to tell me in that amount of time it shouldn't happen? Need more time? I'm just saying logically. And people come up with all kinds of explanations. It's sociological. It's this. It's okay. My question is, when does it change? How long does it take to change? So I would say, if I didn't see what Victor Miller said, and I didn't, and I didn't see, what this curse is all about. This curse is forever. Doesn't mean that, everybody's cursed. People can find a way from it. But in general, a place like that, and the nation itself, you're going to have trouble all the way through. That's what we see. You see one continent just destroyed by, bad weather. A lot of places got so hot and they have water and famines. But I think it's the most ravaged place of wars anywhere in the world. Anywhere. So why is that? Why is that? So that's the reason. There's no other reason that makes any sense. But again, I've been hammered for that, called a racist and whatever. Okay. Right. So you call Victor Miller, a racist. You'll say that, the curse is not what it's supposed to be and whatever. And there are 50 other reasons why it happened. Okay. It's not logical. Right. Totally not logical. But they're the only group. They're only a group. Right. So Ray over there asks, so, where's accountability? So I ask you like this, where's accountability of quote unquote rabbis who trash other people? Other rabbis. Where they're wrong. I'm not saying where, a person's heretic, you have a right to trash them. You have a right to warn people against them. I'm talking about where people are wrong. And there are people, that, people got censured, and basically lost rabbinic ordination. Someone in England that, the chief Sephardi rabbi was appraised of what this person was saying and doing. He revoked his smicha, his rabbinic ordination. Good. What should be done? Right? But people will say, well, see, this rabbi says this and, cause all kinds of problems and blah, blah, blah. So where's integrity? I called someone out a number of years ago because, they called me out, whatever. So I said, okay, you're on Facebook. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I said, I'm going to give you a golden opportunity. Everybody knows who my rabbinic authority is. Everybody knows. They don't have to agree with him. Doesn't matter. Everybody knows. He is the Torah giant of the generation today, according to everyone. Nobody disagrees. You might not agree with everything he says. Doesn't matter. So I said, everybody knows who mine is. Show me. Show the whole world to Facebook. Show them. He says, I am my rabbinical authorities. I don't have to answer to you. You're right. You don't have to answer to me. Show. Come on. Show. Then this person just went on a rant. Total rant. Called me out. Called Rabbi Skoback out. Rabbi Singer out. Guy's a lunatic. Lunatic. You don't have rabbinic authority behind you. You're nothing. Right? You're nothing. So it's not just what you know. This guy in Boca has this missionary come speak. Right? And he says, I have my rabbinic authorities who told me it was okay, but they don't want to be mentioned by name. Yeah, of course they don't want to be mentioned by name, you bonehead. Of course. Why not? Because everyone would rip them to shreds in a second. They would rip them to shreds. Of course you wouldn't want your name mentioned. And then the first guy they would pay, I would probably pay this guy the same thing. They're getting, Jewish money from the UJA, United Jewish Appeal. Pay a missionary to be a motivational speaker. Imagine $50,000. Ray, I would have done it for 10. I would have done it for 10. Can't find the Jewish motivational speaker? You got to use not a top-tier missionary? For goodness sakes. You know, not only that, they brought a sex therapist also to speak years ago. You know, maybe not from the pulpit, okay, but come on. This is something well-respected, someone well-respected, you know, in the Orthodox world, has no rabbinical court. They're going to say, Ray, why doesn't someone revoke his smicha? Yeah, they should. I think they should hold him down and wash his mouth out with soap. That's what they should do. You know, they'll say, oh, got to look at me and say, oh, he's a fanatic, he's this, he's that. Okay, people can say what they want. Truth is what it is. I didn't bring a missionary to come speak. You know, I didn't try and pass that off to get numbers or whatever. You know, they're going to say you got to have, you know, broad shoulders. I understand why he did it. I definitely understand why he did it. So what? You know, there's a limit. And people I went to Yeshiva with, I see what they're doing. God should have mercy on them. Bringing pastors to speak, going to churches, some of them, you know, someone who's, you know, whose son is gay, marches in a gay parade. Now let me ask you, someone who's an Orthodox rabbi, has rabbinic ordination, how in the world can you show solidarity in a gay parade? You say, where's accountability? The modern Orthodox community, this is a big problem. This is a huge problem because they're recognizing that someone asked me, they said, what would you do? I said, if I had a synagogue, you know, two guys walk in, they say, you know, we're together, we're married, this, that, you know. So I would tell them straight out, you know, we don't hold of it. I'm never going to call you to the Torah. You'll never make a kiddush in this shul. You want to come? Okay. But, you know, we're not tolerating this. You know, in the modern Orthodox, we say, no, come in, it's okay. You know, it's not a problem, welcome, whatever we can do to help you. You know, how far do you go try and be makar of them? You know, to draw them close. So say you would never be able to do that, right? You know, because you got to be politically correct. They could sue you. Yeah, they could, probably. That's why I'm not in America. I have my own synagogue. If I want to do it up north, do what I want. They don't like it. When my rabbi say, go eat kugel. You don't have to like it. It's okay. You know, there's a limit to what you can do. I understand it's a big thing in the modern Orthodox community. I get it. How can you acknowledge it? How can you say it's okay? Where's the integrity? Good luck. You know, somebody marches in a gay parade. How can you say that's okay? I don't have an answer. It's not okay. Totally not okay. You know, Torah says it's forbidden. You're acknowledging something that's forbidden. It's not just that. You know, it's one thing, you know, cut them some slack in other ways. You know, that's one thing. But to go and march with people that are showing off, so to speak, what they're doing, and it's an abomination, right? The act itself is an abomination, and you're bragging about it in broad daylight. And this is something that's death penalty. Death penalty. For everybody. How can you march in such a parade? Especially being a rabbinic authority, let's say. I don't care, modern Orthodox, less Orthodox, whatever. You're a rabbi, how can you do that? If you're a Reformer conservative, I don't have any questions. They do whatever they want anyway, it doesn't matter. Right? 100%. You're an Orthodox rabbi, you're marching to show solidarity, that's a problem. Major problem. Where's the integrity? Integrity was lost a long time ago. Right? Person has to have strong fear of heaven. If you don't have strong fear of heaven, you just do what you want. Right? That's why you need a rabbinic authority to go to. That's why I've been close to my Rebbe more than 25 years. Whatever he says, left is right, right is left, that's it. If you don't like it, then go eat kugel. Okay? He calls it the way he sees it. That's it. You know, I just tell me, you know, permissible, not permissible, this, that. That's it. No games. This is a game. That's why he told me to sit and learn as long as I could. You know, you have money, sit and learn. Don't be one of these Mickey Mouse rabbis. He was right. 100%. 100%. You know, but, you know, because other people, it's just, whatever, it's sad. I do keep tabs here and there just to see what people are doing. It's good talk. You make a podcast, right? It's good talk, but it's sad, very, very sad. Yeah. Any other questions? We said, you got to be careful what you listen to, right? And if you have a question, ask. Is this person good to listen to? Not good. I'll know. If I don't know, I can ask someone. But most people I'm aware of. So, you got to be careful because they sound good. This, that, and you can't listen to them. You just can't listen to them. How can someone say, God's not going to give them death penalty for being a homosexual? It's not their fault. Well, whose fault is it? That's not heresy? That's not denying God. God's in charge. Whose fault is it? You'll say God wired him that way. Okay. So he's wired that way. We're all wired differently. He's got more of affinity to this, someone else something, but they're not liable. God's not in charge. There's no punishment over here. Come on. A person's got a big following. What can I say? People say, oh, you're just jealous. That's nothing to do with jealous. We live in a world of falsehood. That's what it is. Falsehood sells. You want to sell headlines? And you say, dog bites man. No headlines. No one's going to buy it. You say, man bites dog? That's headlines. It's headlines. You got these crazy things. That's what sells. We live in an upside down world. How can someone have their own rabbinical court, be a sought after speaker, this and that, and allow a missionary to come speak in the synagogue? Or sex therapist. Even a sex therapist, spoke about, what she went through in the Holocaust. Okay, let's say it was something parv. Would you still allow a sex therapist to come and speak in the synagogue? Even if you're not going to speak about that. Same question. Missionary is worse. Right? But, how could you do that? I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Right? Some people say they went to university, got their minds crushed. Left them open until the brains fall on the floor. Problem. Big problem. Yeah. Any other questions? This is my favorite topic. I go on for days, but I got a class soon. So, all right. So I guess I'm going to stop there. Whatever. We'll continue next week unless you guys want a break. I mean, for sure, within the next, in the next month, that Sunday, I don't know. I have a hard time imagining it's going to be, it's going to be a class then. But, it depends where I'm going to be, but I can't imagine. So it could be we'll take a break then, unless Ray tell me you want to break earlier. But, if not, we'll just continue. So we'll see. I mean, it should be class next week. So if, see what Ray here has to say. Okay, fine. We'll go till then. If send me an email or a text and say, listen, we need a break next week or whatever, and we're gonna have another break after that. So fine. We can definitely, we can definitely do that. Very good. So I'm gonna sign out. Anyone has any questions, feel free. Shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'm gonna sign out. Whichever one is good, middle of the day, almost end of the day for me, and everyone have a great rest of the week.